Well, I didn't mean to jump ahead of Tim here and do the welcome for you, but I know the guys are all anxiously awaiting to see what God's laid on your heart. We really appreciate you getting up at 3:30 in the morning to prepare for us. Since your Central Time, right?
That's right. We're an hour earlier right now.
Seems like 3 hours earlier, right? But, thank you so much for taking the time, and I'm sure each of the men that are on the call this morning are going to be blessed by what God's laid on your heart. I need to go. Wait 10 seconds. I'm going to walk over and start recording, okay?
So, good morning, Mike. It's Tim Gibbons.
Hey, Tim.
I'm so happy to see you again.
Yeah, you too.
I hope that you'll give us a quick update in there of what you're doing up there and how it's going. I know that was a big change for you, very exciting, but also during a very challenging time to do what you're doing.
Yeah. I'll part of what I'm going to talk about is definitely an update on what's going on in our world and what's happening with us. So whenever Bill gives me the thumbs up, I'll jump into it. I don't know, Tim, if you have other things that you need to announce or say before we get going.
No, I just want to reach out to everybody and just do a quick question. Is everybody doing well? And if there's anybody who's needs some help by prayer or efforts, that please share that with us. Harry Hedges, are you on here?
Yes, I am here.
Good. All right, Harry, back at home.
I am.
Yes.
Anybody else that we're concerned about out there, please just shout out, and then once Bill is ready, we'll get Mike Ash to start.
We're good to go, guys. Go ahead.
All right. Bill, you want to mute everybody? Or Chris, you want to mute everybody?
Gotcha.
All right. Well, hey, yeah, like I said, good morning, guys, from Birmingham, Alabama. We are an hour behind, and so we've definitely woken up. Well, it really wasn't that bad because Chris called me and said, hey, what do you think about teaching at this? Which I love this. I love the fact you guys are still meeting and figuring it out. And I know that having to navigate all the technological changes and stuff to do that. But for me, as I kind of was preparing for today, I'm usually an early riser, so it's not too bad for me to do that. So I've been in Birmingham. I moved up here in August of last year, and then my family moved up in October. So we haven't been up here very long. And I moved up here to work with an organization called Courage to Lead, which does coaching, consulting for churches and for organizations. That was really it. And I've done a lot of coaching for churches, especially in the past. And I thought, man, I feel like it's a great fit for me. It kind of works out, a lot of different experience. And so we moved up and just, here we go. And what we moved up for was the role was called Director of Development, basically working with the coaches, working with the clients, and really just helping to go out and, build relationships as we kind of build our business, which there's a lot of potential for growth. Well, when I came up here, it's kind of the fun part of the story. When I came up here, after about 2 months, I realized this job is different than what they need is different than what they thought they needed. They thought they needed someone to go and grow the business. What they actually needed is someone who is highly, highly administrative. They can basically help organize the business because there's a lot going on and a lot of growth happening. But they weren't ready for whatever that role was for me. They definitely were in that season of figuring out where they were, helping to kind of administratively coordinate and do everything. And so we did a conference in February, and we had about 600 people at it. It was awesome. It was downtown Birmingham in a beautiful theater, kind of an old theater. And after the conference, I oversaw all the details of the conference. So everything from, like how many water bottles do we need to all the details. And I kind of oversaw all of it. And afterwards, and I've been talking to our CEO for a while. And after that conference, I just said, hey, I think what you need is someone who is super highly administrative. And I don't think you guys are ready for what kind of the leadership side and some of what you thought you needed and some of what my gift mix is. And so my job for the last 6 months or so was just so highly administrative. So I just said, hey, I think you guys need something different. So he and I actually worked out. So we haven't been here very long. So this is kind of the fun part of the story. And we worked out a transition plan for me to transition out of courage to lead, and then go discover what was next. And then this pandemic hit, which is a great time because we're in the middle of a season where we are basically transitioning out of courage to lead, pursuing another job, something else, and we're in the middle of a global crisis. And so we are firmly in the middle. So that's kind of our zone. And so people have asked us during this time, everyone, when people hear that, the response is like, oh no, like, what are you guys going to do? How are you figuring it out? But honestly, here's the interesting thing about like our season right now is that we're at home, we're trying to figure out what's next. But I would say about 98% of Americans right now are trying to figure out what's going on. Like we're all in this chaos together and we're all trying to figure it out together. And so one of the things that we've done, and I don't know where you're at emotionally with all the pandemic stuff, but one of the things that we've just decided to do is we've decided to look back at everything God has done, because God has showed up. Like he's done things that we're like, this would never work, and then it worked. How would this ever happen? And then it happened. Like we've had multiple times where we've seen that. And we always say on the other side of it, oh, God's timing is perfect. And oh, God, doesn't God work it out? And even things that seem like they're terrible, like usually you look back on the things that seem terrible and you go, man, God worked that out. Like I remember one of the hardest things I went through, before Leanne and I were together, we were engaged. I was engaged to another girl. And when she and I broke up, I just thought, gosh, like life is over, my world is over. But if you've ever seriously dated someone and then not married them, usually you look back and you're like, whoa, like thank the Lord, like Jesus showed up. And so what we've done in the season, and what I encourage everybody to do during the season is to basically act as if you know the end of the story, because in some ways we know God is going to work it out. Like Romans 8:28 says, we know all things will work together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. We know that verse. We quote that verse as a pastor. We say it all the time. We live on that promise. But then chaos hits or the unknown hits, and we tend to live in the midst of a scenario like all of that gets shaken and our foundation gets all messed up and we can't handle it. And so we just said, we're going to the best of our ability, we are going to live as if that's true and live as if his timing is perfect. We just don't know what's on the other side. So people have asked us, so what's next? We don't know. Are there some possibilities? Sure. There's some things out there, but every conversation has ended for us with, well, when this pandemic's over, we'll figure it out. And we're like, all right. So we're just kind of waiting. We're like, come on. So some people are praying for there to be a healing. We're praying for that even more because, we're kind of in this in-between zone. But we have just said for about 95% of us, or 95% of the time, we are standing on this, like God's timing is perfect. He knew what was going to happen. He brought us to Birmingham. He knew that it wouldn't be the exact right fit, which just because it's not the right fit doesn't mean that God doesn't call you to it. Sometimes he calls you into certain scenarios to move you and do some things. And so we just said, we believe God brought us here. We believe that God brought us to a place that wouldn't be a good fit long-term. And God is working something out and we just don't know what that is. So we're gonna do our best. And I think for all of us in the midst of a pandemic, you do your best to walk with a confidence that God is completely in control and he's working behind the scenes and that he's got it. And I think in this time for all of us in the midst of a pandemic as Christians and as Christian men and as Christian leaders in the community, I think one of the responsibilities we have is to the best of our ability. Not that we won't have our freak out moments, we'll have the freak out moments. Not that we don't have our bad days, because we definitely have bad days. But we're going to force ourselves and fight to choose to believe that in the midst of the chaos, God is in control. And we're going to stand on that faith. We're going to proclaim that faith. We're going to say that even if we don't always feel it. We are going to choose to believe it even in the midst of the chaos. And so for all of us, I don't know how this emotionally has all hit you with everything going on, and I don't know how you're feeling and all of that. But I think one of the things that we do in these seasons is we choose to believe that God is working and God will work everything together for good for those who are called according to his purpose, which means regardless of what's happening in your life right now, God is working behind the scenes to bring about some amazing things, and God is doing some things, and he's going to bring some change and bring some things happening. And for us, we've just chosen in this season, we're going to stand in that. We're going to walk in that. We're going to proclaim that with our kids. Our kids don't, they just moved. We just moved schools, and they're like, are we moving? Are we not moving? And we're like, we don't know. I actually got a text from a guy last week who said, hey, would you be willing to talk to a church in Hawaii? and my kids are like, whoa! And I'm like, well, that's a little bit like it's moving out of the country. I'm not sure we're quite like to Hawaii yet. Like we're not quite there. But, for them, we've kind of walked them along the journey and just really trying to teach them through the season. God is completely in control, and God is working behind the scenes. Now, all that to say, like with Courage to Lead, that transition's been great. They've taken care of us. That stuff's worked out. I'm still coaching for them, but more like on a 1099 basis, working on that. So all of that went well. Everything's great, but we're just in the season of like waiting to see what God does. And I think all of us are. We're all waiting to see how God is going to work through this pandemic and how he's going to move, even to the point where you guys are talking right now. Like he's doing things within churches, and all the churches that I'm talking to right now. And like, it's amazing because this online presence, trying to figure this out, this online experience is how do we engage with people? How do we do groups like this? How do we use it? Like it really is forcing innovation into the church, and it's forcing innovation. I don't know if you guys have felt this, but for a lot of us, like these have been our first experiences in Zoom. Like these have been the first time we've actually digitally engaged, because it was like, that's not really my thing. And, smartphones came out and all this stuff. But now if you want any interaction, you really got to figure out this technological piece. And a lot of people have done that. And so there's been a ton of innovation that's happened. Like, I really think that, I don't think that things will change forever. I do think everything is going to have a component of change to it. And it seems like a dynamic of change to it, because between now and the end of the year, there's probably a lot of this uncertainty about getting in groups that are going to continue to happen as we go. So what do we do? So here's the question. This is kind of where I'm going to jump into a little bit deeper. So what do you do in the midst of a season where you are firmly in the middle and you have no control over what's going on, and it just seems like you're waiting? Because I think for all of us, even if you're working, there is a component of you just feel like you're waiting for things to happen and waiting for the nation to open. Well, for me and for our family, what we've done is actually, my wife, when this all first started, she felt like God was speaking to her, which was a big deal, because like I feel like God speaks to me all the time, which isn't always true. So I always had to be careful about like hearing what God says. But my wife, she grew up in a Grace Brethren kind of like really, really conservative church. So she feels like, I think this might be God speaking to me. Like I listen, because I'm like, okay, well, if she thinks that's true, then it probably is. But the phrase that she kept feeling like God was speaking to her is the phrase, don't waste it. Like in this season, don't waste it. And I would encourage you, if you're taking notes, if you're writing anything down, or if you take any notes, that phrase, don't waste it, in this season, with everything going on, all of us trying to figure out what's happening, I believe that idea of not wasting the time that we have right now, not wasting what's going on in the midst of the pandemic, not wasting the opportunities, not focusing so much on all of the bad, but actually choosing to look at some of the good and actually utilizing some of the things that we have right now is huge. In Ephesians chapter 5, it says, so then be careful how you live. Do not be unwise, but wise, making the best use of your time. It says because the times are evil. And I think right now we feel like there's a little bit of that. And honestly, for us, we in the midst of this, where things just feel like it's just going bad, things aren't going very well, it's very easy to focus on the negative. It's very easy to jump on Facebook and to look at how terrible things are. It's very easy for all of us to really get down. And honestly, the most common denominator of connectivity is negativity. So it's easy for us to all get together and talk about how terrible life is or terrible this pandemic is. And like it's easy to talk about all of this, and then you get into politics and talk about how poorly somebody's dealing with it. And then you have all these things, and it's so easy to connect around the negativity. But we have to use a better use of our time, because the days are evil and it's going to pull us over to that. We have to choose to use this and not waste it even in the midst of all of that. And so it says times are evil, therefore do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. And I think in this time, there's a component of being able to look at this as a waste of time, or being able to look at this as a gift of time. And I think that God has given us this gift of giving us the opportunity to kind of pull back from our world and zoom out from our world. So here's 3 areas that our family is doing that. Here's 3 areas we're trying to use our time well. And hopefully for all of us, we can zoom in and kind of go, okay, how do I make sure that I'm looking at these areas in our lives? The first area we're trying not to waste it is our time. And really we're trying to use our time wisely. And so as a family, one of the things that we said, hey, if we're going to be together all the time, the tendency is when you're together all the time you feel like you're together all the time, and then you're just kind of get tired of each other over time. And that happens with us, that happens with everybody. But what we said is, hey, we're going to add some components into our world, and add some components into our day to really help enhance like our week as we go through it. And we've said we're going to try to be intentional with our time. And so one of the things we've done is we've kind of looked at our week and said, okay, how do we make sure that our week actually gets broken up? Because there's no breaking up. It's the same. Wake up, the kids do virtual school. They do that for about 40 minutes, because honestly, virtual school is fast. They're in 6th and 4th grade, so it's not that big of a deal. They wake up, they do virtual school. They watch some TV, they play some electronics, they play basketball outside. They get a little bit bored after doing that for a little while, but their days are just they're just the same. So for us, we've looked at it and said, hey, how do we build some rhythms into our week and rhythms into our days to make sure that breaks up a little bit? So one of the things that we've started doing is like for their school, we kind of set a schedule for them, but we start the day off at 8:30 with PE, and I lead their PE class. So I tell them I'm their PE coach, and we do everything. We've learned to juggle. Yesterday we did a weight workout. We go running, we do whatever. But for us, it's a great time together. And we talk about it at night. Hey, what was your touchdown? And almost every day, their touchdown was PE in the morning, partially because they got to spend some time with their dad, and partially because they did something a little bit different, a little bit creative. And so for us, how do you actually build some components into your day that actually helps break it up, that you can look forward to, that adds a little bit of change, but you can use that time wisely? Another thing we've done is we've looked at our week. So Wednesday night, it's midweek movie night. Woo! Now, again, in this pandemic, it's very easy to watch a movie every night, or to watch TV every night. We've just kind of labeled it and tried to celebrate it. Friday night is family night. And to be honest with you, family night and midweek movie night look almost identical. But we've called them something different. We celebrate it differently. And on Friday night, we have pizza. That's probably the difference there. We just have pizza. Now, for them, they just eat frozen pizza. We're not ordering pizza. It's nothing crazy. But for Friday night, it's a big deal. Saturday, we call it game night, where we have appetizers and we just play games as a family. And so we just looked at our week. And then Fridays too. So today's Friday. Friday, we do Field Trip Friday, where, all week we're doing other stuff. But on Fridays, we go on a field trip. And we get, and really all you can do is you go to a park, and in Birmingham, you go hiking. So we go hiking. Now, all hiking looks exactly the same, but we've tried to actually change it up. And again, if you don't have small kids or your world's different, but here's what I would say: how can you use your time wisely? How can you in this season break up your day and break up your week and actually begin to theme different things so that you are using your time in the right way? How can you make sure that you are still waking up in a reasonably right rhythm? I know a lot of people right now are trying to figure out how to get some things done that need to be done. And part of that is because there isn't necessarily a hard start to the day, because a lot of people work from home or they're figuring that out. But even for me, again, in this in-between season, I'm still waking up at 5 a.m. and I'm still working out at 6. And I'm still doing that. Part of it is because the rhythm of your day has to stay the same for the productivity of the rest of the day. And if you just kind of sleep past your normal time and your morning rhythm's off and you're not having the quiet time, it tends to throw the whole week off. And so how do we make the most of our time and use it wisely in the season? And then here's a question to go with that too. What are the time wasters that you need to get rid of for a season? What are the things that get in your way? And maybe it's Netflix, maybe it's social media, but what do you need to actually kind of stay away from for a little bit so that you can use your time wisely? The second area for us, we're trying not to waste it, or what we're trying to do is not to waste it, is we're trying to grow ourselves, We've actually sat down with our kids, and we're doing this as well, and asking the question, how do we make sure that we get better in the seasons? And what can we do? Like, our oldest son right now has learned how to do the Rubik's Cube. Like, he's learned, you mess it up, he can do it. He is down to doing it in under a minute and a half. Now, I don't know how he learned how to do this, but I do know how he learned how to do it. He just went on YouTube and searched for it, and they teach you how to do it, and he's just practiced it. Well, the fun thing about that is that's not necessarily making him like, it's not like, wow, he's so smart. But I tell you what, how many people do you know that can actually do a Rubik's Cube? And so I'm like, hey, buddy, when you get around your friends, like, that's a really cool thing to have. Well, he just kind of said a couple different things that he wants to do to get better. My question for us is, where do we want to get better? Like, where do you want to grow in this season? And biblically, when you look at the different, really most of the people that did anything significant for God, they a lot of them had those seasons where they actually went off and they were kind of in isolation. You had Daniel, who was in isolation, who got captive. And Daniel had a choice. Either Daniel was kind of going to give in to society and give in to what was going on and really kind of focus on the negative part of where he was. But instead, Daniel chose, hey, I'm still going to grow. I'm still going to engage. I'm still going to follow the laws of God. Like, I'm still going to get better in this season. And Daniel ended up setting himself apart from everybody else around. David was the same way. David went in isolation, and David learned more in isolation and grew more as a leader in isolation than he really did under Saul when he was with him in the beginning. Joseph was the same way. Joseph in Potiphar's house, he learned how to lead in Potiphar's house. He learned how to lead well. And I think he learned humility in the dungeon. Like, he was continuing to lead. I believe God gives us these periods of isolation and kind of these in-between zones. And these are moments when God works in us. I think there are moments when God works and teaches us how to do things out here, like skill set. And there are things where God works in us. I think that God can be doing some things to teach you how to do some things better and different and, on the outside, but he also works some things on the inside. And so I think even just making that a course of prayer and saying, God, where do you want me to grow? Like, what are the areas you want me to get better? Where am I a little bit off? Because here's what we all said at one point. If I just had more time, and guess what? You have more time. Like, if I would just read more books, and then now we're watching more TV, I would just be in shape. But now you're kind of just sleeping at like, where do you need to grow yourself in this season so that you make the most of your time and you don't waste it? And then the third area, here's the question for you to think about on that. What can you begin to do, let's say on Monday? So give it the weekend. What can you begin to do on Monday to begin growing? What's the area you need to grow? And what is the one thing you can do every day to start leading you in that direction? Maybe it's reading a chapter of a book. Maybe it's starting to journal. Maybe it's starting to exercise. Maybe whatever that is, what can you do to get one step better, to get just a little bit better? And then the third thing, and this is the last thing for us that I would say we're trying to look at and trying to ask the question of how do we not waste it in the season, is we're trying to look ahead. We're trying to look ahead. Now, of course, in this in-between season, we're trying to look ahead, but I think for all of us in the season we're in, it's so important to look ahead. And here's the reason why, because in the midst of trauma, and this really is trauma for our nation, it's trauma for our communities, in the midst of trauma and the midst of global shutdowns, in the midst of, hey, everybody stay at home, what happens is that your mind and your body goes into survival mode. And so what you try to do is you try to figure out, how do I just make sure that I'm surviving in this season? And so it becomes very paralyzing for communities. It becomes very paralyzing. In fact, one of the big areas right now, because we've been in this now a few weeks, that we've been coaching churches in and talking to pastors about is, hey, you survived, you figured out the technology piece, you figure out how to stream on the weekends. Okay, the next step that you have to do in this season is you have to begin thinking about what's next. Like, you have to begin thinking forward, because a lot of churches aren't doing that. They're just thinking, and here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to actually go, I can't wait till everything gets back to normal. But we don't know how long that's going to be. And honestly, we don't know what normal is going to look like in a new season. Like, we could be, again, depending on who you ask, you could be weeks or months or, half a year at, like, in an altered reality. Well, to be able to look forward and go, okay, in light of my job, in light of my family, a lot of my church, a lot of my involvement, a lot of my small group, what do I need to do to make sure that I'm ready for whatever looks like, whatever's coming, and how do I prepare for what's going to happen ahead? And because in this season, it's so important for us to do this. For Paul, you know, when he was in prison, again, prison was very isolating for him. Like that was kind of his zone. But Paul, if you look it's in Corinthians, Romans, Thessalonians. But if you look in his verses, he always says, "But I will come to you very soon." But I'm looking forward to being there if the Lord will. I'm looking to actually, like Paul, as he's sitting in prison without any real reason to think that he would ever get out, he was thinking ahead. He was thinking, okay, when all this is over. Now, again, when's it going to be over? I don't know. But he was planning ahead. For all of us to be able to zoom out, like this is a gift of time where God has given us to be able to zoom out and go, okay, let's look at the state of our family. How's our family? How's my relationship with my wife? How am I doing with my kids? How am I doing with my grandkids? Like, how's all that? How's my job? Like, are there any things that I just don't, like, I'm just not doing well that I need to do better? Like, where do I need to engage? But to be able to zoom out and evaluate the different areas of our lives and go, how can I, moving forward, change this and make this better? I think for us, it's important for us to begin looking ahead and not just looking in our survival mode, because we have to be ready. We've got to be ready for whatever's coming, and we don't want to waste the time we have now to prepare for what's next. And so those three areas: use your time wisely, kind of focus on your time, use your time wisely, grow yourself, and look ahead. And I think if we do this, we're going to come out on the other side. We're going to be grateful, because this is a gift of time. And when we use the gift of time well, and we use the gift that God gives us, He helps us to grow. And so those are the three areas that I felt like when Chris said, "Hey, do you want to talk and kind of teach and go through it?" I'm like, yeah, this is kind of an interesting season for us, but we're really trying not to waste it. And I hope for you in this season, I hope for, as you're going through this, that this is not a wasted season right now. This is not a season where you look on and go, oh, that was kind of a waste, because I think there's so much opportunity. I think there's opportunity for ministry. I think there's opportunity for growth. I think there's opportunity for God to use us and God to grow us and God to do some amazing things in us. And so I would encourage you guys in the season to really ask the question, how do I not waste it in the season? Okay, I'm going to pray, and then I don't know what happens next. So I'll just let Bill unmute or somebody unmute, and then they can take it from there. But Jesus, help us not to waste it. God, you have complete control over the season, and God, you know what's going on. And Father, we ask that you would help us to make to use this time wisely, and God, to understand what your will is even in this time for us. God, help us to even engage in the way we use our time, engage in our personal growth, and help us to look ahead. God, I pray that you would help this season not to be a paralyzing season for us, but an advancement season. And God, give us wisdom on how to do that as we move forward. In Jesus' name, amen.
Well, Mike,
Go ahead, Bill.
as always, man, you brought it home, brother. Really enjoyed hearing your heart this morning. I hope this doesn't sound sarcastic, but I wish you had talked to us about 6 weeks ago. There's some things that I probably should have done. I had, when I look at the list of three things, I mean, those are kind of things that we were, kind of going through my head, on the front end of this whole thing. And you're right. You get sucked into some Netflix series and you're binging and all this kind of thing. And, I had a couple of books pulled out that I was going to address, and I was like, nah, I got to get through these books. And I have a Rubik's Cube sitting on my desk to try to make me look smarter than I really am. And I'm going to go to YouTube today, and I'm going to watch a YouTube video on how to do it.
I think, Bill, for accountability, I think next Friday you should bring your Rubik's Cube and then just show us how you can do it.
That's a great idea. Thanks a lot, Mike. I appreciate that. But we have been opening it up and letting guys share if there's anything on their heart, in reference to the message, like I've just done. And again, we will all continue to pray that God will lead you. I mean, your talent is off the charts, bro. I mean, God's got something absolutely amazing for you and your family. And you guys are so precious. We love you to death, and hope that, that you will continue in his path, and that God will open those doors and just sling them open here, even during the pandemic, and you'll know and have a peace in your heart as you move forward.
Well, if the thing in Miami does work out, at least everybody will have a place to stay. So we'll see
Yeah.
what happens. But we're hoping not to move to Miami, to be honest, or not Miami, but Hawaii. So we'll see how that works. Yeah.
That sounds like fun. Well, anybody else that wants to, it looks like Chris put on his camera. Hey, welcome, Chris.
I was here the whole time, Bill. I just didn't want to.
I know you were. I figured you were trying to do your hair, and you just didn't get a chance to get on yet. So
That's exactly what it was.
Hey, I've got a question, Chris. How long are you going to let that beard grow before you decide to trim it off?
The beard? I'm
Yeah,
waiting
how
for
long
this
do
to
you let it
grow until this
No,
starts
that's not
growing.
gonna happen. That's not going to happen. Look at this. It only gets worse, man.
Hey, Mike, Jim Wilson here. Aloha Malanui. What resonated with me this morning is act like you know the end of the story. And I think this is a great opportunity for witness now. For us, because we do know the end of the story, to share the greatest story. I'm back on here, I think. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I'll repeat again. I said, what resonated with me is you say that act like we know the end of the story. We do know the end of the story, and this is a great opportunity for us to share our calm in the storm and tell the greatest story.
Yeah, and I think for me and for us, you know, with our kids and the people around us, you know, it's been this mix. You don't want to like not feel the emotion of it, because there is emotion that goes with it. Like there are bad days, but it's choosing to believe and choosing, like some of those things, even what you speak and what you think and what you dwell on, you know, that this whole taking thoughts captive, it's so easy to go down the spiral. And so for us, there have been days where there's been a fight, and there have been days where it's like, okay, I'm going to go sit on the couch. And like, so there are those moments and those times you can't allow that to be a defining moment of the whole time. And I do think the way our marriages are handled during this time, the way we interact with our kids, the way we do our job, kind of our attitude, what we post on social media, I do think that's a bullhorn right now, because people are so shaky that anytime there's a foundational strength, people gravitate towards it. And so I think on some of that, it's just being careful about some of the way that you present during this time to go, yeah, we're a little, like, again, that's the way I've been saying it is, man, we are 95% of the time, we believe, but there's that 5%. And we have those moments of freak out. And I think being able to kind of say, hey, it's okay to have that emotion and go through it. But really the foundation is God is completely in control. And, you know, and some of that is just based on, because we've seen him do it. I've been in situations where I didn't know how God was going to work things out in the past, and God always worked it out. And so some of that is you trust on what he's going to do based on what he's done in the past. So it's good.
This is Tim. I think it's so important that we be examples of Christians and leaders in having faith in God to personify that to others. I've talked to bankruptcy judges and bankers and medical people recently, and you know, everybody's consensus is this is just the beginning. We haven't even really seen the economic impact of this. We've seen the furloughs and the job losses, but what's coming later is going to be much more difficult than what we're going through now. And we just need to show others by wearing it on our sleeves is that, yes, we believe that God has this in charge for us and that we're going to be okay if we take the time to listen to him.
Well, and
Hey, Mike,
for me,
Jim.
I was going to say, for me, worst case scenario, like, again, you know, we go 3 or 4 months without a job, we're going to foreclose on our house. And that'll be about the right time that Chris and Jen finish their house, and we're just going to move in with them. So it's really going to work out. So at
That
the end of the
sounds
day,
great.
that could be what the Lord's doing the whole time, is to get us moving with the caper. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Jim.
Hey, yeah. Hey, Mike, this is Jim Whittlesey. And, if you really believe that God is omnipotent and God is omniscient, then how can you possibly say he had anything to do with this? It just punches a huge hole in that belief system.
Well, I don't know. Again, I don't know what he had to, like, as far as like him having to do with it. I know that God works it out. Like, I know for me, it's I think that's sickness and pain and some of the things that God has never intended, but I do think he works all those things out, and that he's working behind the scenes and through some of that. And so I think that's where we trust that God works behind the scenes to work things out even as they come. And even, and honestly, one of the things I've been praying for the last couple of days is, and we probably all seen it on social media, is that young man who got shot. And it's terrible. I mean, it's a horrible scenario. It was a terrible crime. All those things. And for me, the prayer has been obviously for the family, but also that like, again, you hate that someone would have to die for this to happen, but this elevates the conversation about race in our world, where there's actually action that begins to happen based on some of those things. Because racism still exists. People still act out of that. And man, that at some point that has to be eradicated. We have to have those conversations. And so you look at it and go, well, I don't think God like made this kid die. Like, obviously that's not true, but that God will use circumstances, even the worst of circumstances, that a family lost their son. And that he's going to use a circumstance like that, and he's going to elevate a conversation. He's going to get some people talking. And so it's trusting that God doesn't cause some of it, but he will work behind the scenes, and he is constantly working. Because again, even biblically, like God didn't make Saul crazy. God didn't make Joseph's brother to throw him in the pit, but he worked behind the scenes to do some things that those guys could never even imagine. So I think it's trusting that he's working behind the scenes to do some things that we don't even, like, we just can't see. And so you have to trust even though you can't see it. And so I think that's a challenge at times for me, at least.
Well, always remember, if you bring it downwards to a king, a benevolent king of a country, he has the authority, he has the power, but his people may choose to do otherwise. God created a universe and mankind, and he gave us free will. And from the beginning, with Adam and Eve, look what they did. Look at Cain and Abel, all the way through to the crucifixion of Jesus, to the Holocaust. And you look at it and you say, where's loving God during the Holocaust? Well, there's Satan behind Hitler, Stalin, Goebbels, Goring, all of them, trying to destroy every Jew in the entire world. And look what happens when it's all over with. The nation of Israel is recreated, and it fulfilled prophecy in the Bible that they would reunite. So no, it's a spiritual warfare, and until you recognize that all of this that's going on is a spiritual warfare that we don't see, it all begins to make sense. So you sit there and you look at this pandemic, whether it came from a lab or from a wet market or purposefully was done by China, which, there's some smoke there to bring down the economies of the world. It's a spiritual warfare, and we're living through it.
And Mike, just read this morning that Georgia, Florida, and Alabama have the highest rates of unemployment in the country. And I've been following the CDC stats that there are 10 counties in the United States that have a disproportionate rate of coronavirus cases and deaths, like 9 or 10% die. 5 of those counties are in rural South Georgia, out of the whole country, 50% of them, which is pretty close to you. So I want to know how you and the coaching of the churches are discovering new ways to meet the needs of the marginalized in this time. Not just focus on family, but the people who are really at high risk.
You know,
Hey, Jim,
honestly,
let me add to that before Mike goes in there. Let me just add to that. Half the counties in America have no cases, 0 cases in half the counties, and that to me is phenomenal. And 3 states have over 50% of the cases and the deaths.
well, and I would say as far as what churches are doing right now, I think what we have seen is that the church, in the midst of what's going on, they've had to do 2 things. They have figured out the Sunday morning digital presence, and I would say churches in general, pastors in general, are more in the digital space. They're doing Facebook stuff now, Facebook Live. They're doing stuff in the middle of the week. They've kind of figured out the digital side, and I would say the other thing they've had to figure out is the outreach side. And so I think it seems like in the midst of everything shutting down, that the church has really turned, a lot of churches at least have really turned into the church in the community, where they're actually going into the community and they're doing more in the community now in the midst of this pandemic than they probably ever have. And so I think right now, how are they reaching the marginalized and people who are struggling and people who are out there, and just in general, again, even for the communities that don't have anyone there, the counties that don't have anyone, with the pandemic, they're still shut down. So I think the churches still are going out. They're being careful with it all, but they're going out and they're just serving. And so I think they're serving some basic needs, but they're just going out and really asking the question, what are we best able to serve? How are we best able to serve? And so it seems like, from everything I've seen out there, that the church is kind of really, like, if they've ever gone in the community this season, they've gone to the community more than ever. And I think a lot of the reason is because a lot of the normal things that are happening and going on, they're just not, like, since there seems to be more time and more space, the church has kind of turned more into serving the community than they ever had before. So that's what, to answer your question, Jim, that's what it seems.
Mike, can you hear me? This is Casey. Can you hear me, buddy? Good. If you scan over the 50 participants here, I think you might find that you might be the youngest one here if you look real closely. The road that you're traveling on is something that I think we've all traveled on, and there will certainly be speed bumps and potholes in your life. I think to be